USC back in the win column. Trojans over the Oregon State Beavers 38-10. Talking USC football. Of course, we're talking to Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles. Nick, this was the right team for USC to get healthy on, but when you look at the actual team, they're still not healthy physically. But following that Washington State loss on the road, one in which we kind of predicted for a number of months, USC back in the win column by 4 touchdowns over Oregon State. Your thoughts on what you saw today?
Yeah, no disrespect to Oregon State, but this was about as close to a bye week as USC gets until the final week of November. And it came at a right time, too. The last 3 games, USC offense has just been terrible. And next week, they've got Utah, and then they take a road trip to Notre Dame, and then they've still got games against Colorado on the road and UCLA as well. So this was a lot of folks are going to look at this as just sort of a decent win against a pretty bad team that is banged up with injuries. And they're going to look at the interceptions and the fumbles and still see a lot of mistakes that need to be cleaned up. And those are all true. But I really think this was actually a very important game for USC because their offense needed a reset button. In the worst possible way. Yes, they've dealt with injuries. And yes, the offensive or the wide receivers are filled with a bunch of unknowns and oh gods. And yes, Darnold is staring down receivers and forcing passes into coverage and still has some problems there. But ultimately, T. Martin's offensive play calling is really hamstrung this defense. Or this offense. And Texas was the first defense to figure out, you know what, if they can't run the ball, they're pretty bad. So let's blanket Deontay Burnett and let's force Heisman Trophy candidate Sam Darnold to throw the ball to anyone else. And they've done that, and it's worked very well. It's gotten to the point now where Martin's offense is basically Deontay Burnett, whichever running back is healthy, and then a second receiver to be named later. And that's very easy to stop. So coming into Oregon State, most of their receivers were finally healthy. They were without Stephen Carr, who's a running back and does some things with catching the ball. They were down 2 offensive linemen, so that wasn't great, but most of their receivers were back and healthy. And they went from basically having 3 guys for the defense to worry about to all kinds of guys. I mean, they spread the ball out to everyone. Last week, I think 4 receivers caught passes against Washington State. Vaughn's had 6. Burnett had 6. Joe Lewis, I believe, had 2. And then Josh Imatorbhebhe had 1. All right, so not exactly a spread them out, throw it down the field, gunslinging type of offense that we're used to seeing from Sam Darnold last year. Compare that to this week, where I believe 13 players had catches. Deontay Burnett was not the leading receiver. He only had, I think, 2 targets, caught them both for 20 yards and a touchdown. But Vaughn's had 5 catches, Stephen Mitchell 4. They actually started throwing to their tight end, Tyler Petite. They started throwing to Ronald Jones, who has been an incredibly effective offensive weapon who's largely been taken out of the game because opposing defenses were stacking the box, so he couldn't run much, and they weren't throwing to him, and he's not the world's greatest blocker, so in passing situations, he just kind of didn't really need to be on the field, to be honest with you, but they started throwing to him. He caught a couple, had a really nice play, receiving the ball, ran the ball well as well. They got a lot of their young freshman wide receivers involved. I mean, not a lot of them, or not a lot of passes to each of them, but everyone got some looks. Josh Imatorbhebhe, Eric Croman-Hoek. Half the people don't even know who he is that are USC fans. He's like the 3rd string tight end or something. He got a pass. Granted, it was only 1 pass for 4 yards, but they weren't even throwing to their starting tight end, Tyler Petite. So Josh Fallow, another guy, the dude's 6'6", 240-ish, huge tight end, but he's raw. He's very inexperienced, and he only coming into this game and only had 1 target all year. They threw to him again this week. He was wide open, and he took it in for a beautiful 30-yard touchdown. Darnold was actually able to throw the ball downfield accurately, which is a huge change of pace. But, you know, guys that we thought could be good, but just weren't really getting a chance. Trayvon Sidney, another guy that you didn't, unless you read the daily practice reports, you'd probably never heard his name. Randall Grimes, another one like that. Michael Pittman Jr., who had a decent freshman campaign last year, but hasn't gotten it together this year. He showed up for a couple catches. So yes, it was against an inferior opponent. They had vastly more talent than the Oregon State defense, and the Oregon State defense was banged up by injuries. But just the fact that they were actually using other receivers beyond just Burnett plus another guy on a rotating basis says a lot. The fact that Darnold was able to connect with all these guys says a lot. That T. Martin was actually running plays that let more than two receivers actually get out and open says a lot. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, this was kind of a scrimmage to install sort of a lot of these changes on offense. You don't want to take too much away from winning by 28. But at the same time, they've actually shown now, headed into Utah, that you can't just stop the run and shut this offense down. Before, you could stack the box, stop the run, blanket Burnett, and then that's pretty much it. They weren't going to score points unless they had an explosive play from Ronald Jones or a home run touchdown ball to Burnett, or the defense set them up inside the other team's 40. That was basically how they scored points for the most part in the last 3 games. But now opposing defense are going to have to cover the whole field. And if the offense that had shown up the last 3 games shows up against Utah and then the following week at Notre Dame, you're looking at 2 losses for the Trojans, more than likely. And you're also looking at that's losing 3 of their last 4. They're 4-3. They're barely above 500. They've got a road trip to Colorado. UCLA is on the slate. All of a sudden, this thing goes from they're a hot pick for the playoffs to this thing spiraling out of control. So yes, it was Oregon State, and yes, they won comfortably, and yes, they still made a lot of mistakes that need to be cleaned up. But I think this was a really good reset button for the offense, and you really have to be excited now for this offensive unit headed into some pretty tough teams, and that could have been easy losses, quite honestly, the way they were playing. So I think this is, when we look back, if USC sort of continues on and finds success and gets into the Pac-12 championship game, and then who knows, I think we really could look back at this Oregon State game and go, okay, that's when they switched it up. That's when they figured it out. And if that happens, then yeah, I think we're going to look back and say, oh, okay, Oregon State was actually an important game. But if they just revert back to business as usual and slip back into the same bad tendencies, and this was just sort of an anomaly against a bad team, then yeah, I think USC could start to fall apart as the year goes on. But I think this could really be a turning point for the Trojans. Hopefully they build on this on the offense, clean up the turnovers, clean up the penalties, and really get back to that spread the ball out, sling the ball down the field style they had with Sam Darnold last year that worked so darn well. And then once you do that, you can get back to Jones and Carr running for a combined 240, 300 yards a game. And they'll be hard to stop. But they really needed, at the end of the day, to establish the pass, to open up the box and set up the run. And today they established the pass. It was a very good day. Everyone's going to look at the interception and the fumble by Darnold, or the couple fumbles. But I think this was a really good day for the USC offense. It was a much-needed day. And I really think, not that they're worried about it right now, but I think Utah is going to look at this tape and go, okay, we have to rethink some things here. And Notre Dame as well, because they were definitely expecting one USC defense, and a different one showed up today. And that's got to be a huge advantage for the Trojans.
36 passes, 37 rushes, balanced attack for the Trojans. Ronald Jones, 12 carries, 79 yards, 2 sacks, and 5 tackles for loss for the defense. Don't really speak to getting into the backfield much, but all you have to do is look at the scoreboard and see that Oregon State didn't reach the end zone until it wasn't a game. So they didn't score any competitive points when it was a competitive game. So that bodes well for USC on that side of the ball. And as you mentioned, Utah, not an ultra-talented team, but very, very physical, and USC is going to have to buckle up for that one, as they typically do. It seems like it's always down to the wire with Utah in particular, and certainly was last year on the road, this time at the Coliseum, and Notre Dame in 2 weeks, a team that's been playing very, very well. Good stuff, Nick. Definitely a theme that we talked about in the offseason and during the first couple weeks was the Deontay Burnett. He's the guy. Who else do you have? And a nice job of breaking things down as USC tries to reinvent the offense a little bit to be a little bit more diversified as they head down the home stretch here. All right, Nick Dempsey, Conquest Chronicles, helping us break down USC, Oregon State. And when I say helping us break down, I mean he is breaking down USC and Oregon State. So I appreciate it, Nick. Always love having you come on here and knock out the analysis.
Of course, Mark, anytime.